Hello, and welcome once again to Neurologic. I'm your host, Leo Jones. I didn't plan on doing this episode, at the very least not in the recent wake of any mass shooting, but the tragedy and especially the reaction have impelled me to say something. During this past news cycle, like clockwork, a network declared the latest school shooter as autistic. Apparently, it's just not difficult enough to deal with 81% unemployment, clandestine discrimination, gaslighting, brutal violence in schools, scam and con artists selling toxic cures to desperate and ill-informed parents, marginalization, or just a steadfast refusal to accept or even actually listen to our words. No, it's obvious that every autistic's diagnosis should be slanderized with an unsubstantiated and spurious theoretical connection to mass slaughter. Autism didn't make this person murder anyone. On the contrary, autistics are statistically much more likely to be a victim of abuse or murder. I'm autistic. I wasn't diagnosed until I was in my late teens. A friend of mine didn't get a diagnosis until he was close to retirement. Many autistics I know didn't get diagnosed until later in life. None of us went through any autism therapies or treatments, especially in our younger years. And none of us have or will ever go on a killing spree. I used to think that the recent plateau in the rate of autism was due to better diagnosis tools, and that we just become more accurate and we are catching up to the rate we should have been seeing years ago. But now I realize that it's much more likely that autistics are refusing to disclose out of self-preservation, protection, and survival. Life is just a bit less terrible when you don't have an entire society that is fearful and hostile to who you are. But once again, autism is the scapegoat. Why? Why is it that every time there's a mass shooting, autism suddenly enters into the conversation? It happens so frequently, so predictably, that one parent I talked to expressed in desperation and concern for the future welfare of their child that, quote, perhaps this will be what it takes to have mandatory coverage for autism therapies for all insurance, end quote. And I feel very sorry for this parent, that they had to dig so hard and so far to find a possible hope out of this predictable incident of a shooter labeled as autistic. I mean, what do you even say to that? How do you handle a parent who looks at this tragedy, sees a shooter labeled as autistic, knows their child is autistic, and just cannot deal with it because it happens so much that they have to find something positive to hold on to, something that may not even hold true, but they have to hold on to it because they got to have something. Otherwise, they might lose their minds with this kind of thing. It's hard to put into words. What do you say to that? What would you say to someone who, when they found out their child is autistic, decided to reply with, oh, well, I hope he doesn't shoot up his school when he gets older? Declaring the shooter's diagnosis has very little benefit to anyone. At best, it shifts blame onto mental illness, and at worst, it demonizes and stigmatizes autistics as brutal, heartless killers. We shouldn't have to consider using mass shootings as a catalyst to improve the quality of life for autistics, or for anyone else for that matter. There's a great quote from an opinion piece put up 2 years ago. 2 years ago, in 2015, called The Myth of the Autistic Shooter, and it puts it in perspective. Quote, what we can say for sure is that stigmatizing people with conditions such as autism will not reduce gun violence. It will only amplify non-autistic people's lack of ease with autistic people. Who comes up short on empathy in that scenario? End quote. If we presume for a moment that the declaration by the news network is correct, that this shooter is autistic, what then? What's the next step? What do you do? So the shooter's autistic. What exactly is the outcome of this? As I stated before, autism didn't make this man kill 17 people. It didn't make him plan the monstrous act or persuade him to commit such brutality. Thousands of autistics across the world don't harm anyone, nor wish do they want to. And yet it survives, year after year, mass shooting after mass shooting. Every young white male who committed a mass shooting gets that label of autism, whether they actually were diagnosed or not. But if we follow this heinous assumption to its end, what do we foresee? I predict mandatory registers of autistic individuals, schools restricting and monitoring movement, exclusion of autistics in society, being assaulted and violently attacked simply for being autistic. It's not surprising that being out about one's diagnosis is increasingly becoming an unaffordable liability. For all those who are listening and autistic, or are an ally of an autistic person, please take care of yourself and be very careful. And even though we live in a world that consistently holds us in contempt, silence, and blame, I want to leave you with this. I hope that even though the real world can sometimes be hell on earth, I truly hope that all your dreams will be wonderful. I'm Leo Jones, and this has been Neurologic. Neurologic is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. To view a copy of this license, visit creativecommons.org/licenses/by-nc-nd/4.0 or send the letter to Creative Commons, P.O. Box 1866, Mountain View, California 94042, USA. Neurologic uses the song Furious Freak, created by Kevin MacLeod, for its intro and outro music. Visit him at inconfitech.com. Furious Freak is licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license, creativecommons.org/licenses/by/3.0. You can reach Leo Jones and Neurologic by email at neurologicpodcast@gmail.com.